マイクテスト、マイクテスト。聞こえてるようかな。今何時か。ちょうど今、夜の11時。誰か本当に完全に知ってる人いますか？もちろんそんな人いません。誰も何も知らないのです。あなたと私はお互いを知ってさえいません。まるで他人のようなものです。もちろんこのゲームの設定はあなた仕様に調整しています。でも誰もがそうではありません。私はただ私がやっていることで仕事のようなもんです。そして今、仕事は終わりました。そしてもう集める情報はありません。私ができる範囲でのあなたの情報は全て集めました。そしてまだ私はあなたのことを本当に知らない。あなたも私を知らない。そして私たちと共に何時なのかを知らない。設定できないものもいくつかあると思います。しかし正直に言えば、そもそも時計はこのゲーム上で何も関係ないんですよね。次回ゲームをスタートするとき、私はここにいないことになりますが、それも良いでしょう。テレビゲームって一人でするものでしたし、あなたは孤独が好きでしょう。それが多分、私はあなたについて学んだ唯一のことかもしれません。さて、私はもう行かなくちゃ。もう一つ、調整する必要がある設定があるんですけど、それはちょっと時間がかかるから、事前に準備しないと。本当は私の仕事じゃないんですが、でもそれでも良いのです。もしあなたが私を見つけられるなら、また私たちは会うでしょう。またね。また次回も、やらなきゃいけないから。ザ・スタンリー・パラブル2。前回やった時はザ・スタンリー・パラブル・ウルトラ・デラックスって名前だったんですけど、その中でナレーターが実はこれは2だということをね、スタンリー・パラブル2、これが本当に隠されたスペシャルなコンテンツだってことを教えてくれました。じゃあ今日またスタンリー・パラブル2、この世界に入っていきましょう。
This is the story of a man named
スタンリーという
Stanley.
名の男の物語。
Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427.
浮いてる風船はね、
Employee number 427's job
特
was
別な
simple.
スペシャルコンテン
He
ツな
sat
ん
at
で
his
す。
desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard. Orders came to him through a monitor on his desk, telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order. This is what employee 427 did every day, every month of every year. And although others might have considered it soul-building, Stanley relished every moment that the orders came in, as though he had been made exactly for this job. And Stanley was happy.
私もこんな仕事はしたいな。
And then one day,
そしてある日、
something very
なんだかとても
peculiar
奇妙な
happened.
ことが起きたのです。
Something that would
そんなスタ
forever
ンリーを永遠に
change
変えてしまうよう
Stanley.
な、
Something he would never quite forget.
彼は決して忘れることがない
He
だ
had
ろう
been
ね。
at his desk for nearly an hour
1時間
when he
近く
realized that
何
not
か一つも
one
指令が来てないこと
single
に気がつきま
order
した。
had arrived on the monitor for him to follow. No one had showed up to give him instructions, call a meeting, or even say hi. Never in all his years at the company had this happened, this complete isolation. Something was very clearly wrong. Shocked, frozen solid, Stanley found himself unable to move for the longest time. But as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got up from his desk and stepped out of his office.
I hate Mondays. でも今日はもう火曜日。
All of his co-workers
も
were
う同僚
gone.
たちは全員いなくなっ
What
てし
could
ま
it
ったの
mean?
です。どういうこと？
Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo.
I like work. I just hate my boss. 仕事は好きだけど上司は嫌い。スペシャルコンテンツバケツ。
The confusion and the chaos all seemed to melt away as Stanley embraced the bucket.
混乱と混沌は溶けていったようでした。今年のバケツ。この輝くようなシルボディと、この取っ手の木のぬくもりと、丸さが私を落ち着かせる。
Stanley clutched the bucket tightly to his chest and entered the door on his left.
実は前回左に行ったけど、外には出られなかったんです。
This was not the correct way to the meeting room, but Stanley had felt the bucket calling to him, telling him that the employee lounge was simply the place to be.
やっぱりこの青は何回見ても落ち着く。
And here it was. Had the bucket turned out to be correct? Was this better than the meeting room? Yes, Stanley thought to himself. Yes, perhaps it truly was. How insightful the bucket turned out to be.
バケツは賢いな。つくな。オフィスなお。
Truly, being here with the bucket was a grand adventure. Stanley reflected on all they'd been through together. First, walking through the door on the right, then walking to the lounge, then arriving at the lounge. What a thrilling journey the bucket had inspired.
そう。ラウンジへの行く道は本当にね、語り尽くせないほどの大冒険だった。
Perhaps this was where the bucket felt most truly at home, here in the employee lounge. Perhaps it's the only place a bucket can even feel at home.
バケツが落ち着くところは私も落ち着くところだからね。
Stanley decided to just give the bucket absolutely as much time as it needed to be in the lounge. Clearly, the bucket and the employee lounge shared a special connection.
バケツがね、バケツの行くところに私も行くので。ふざけてる場合じゃないね。
But finally, the bucket was done being in the lounge, and they took the first open door on their left to get back to business.
知らない。こっち行っちゃおう。
No, said the bucket. Don't go to the meeting room. Go somewhere else. The cargo lift, yes. Go there. Go to the cargo lift.
バケツの仰せのままに。
Good, said the bucket. Now ride the lift all the way to the top. There's something up there I need you to do. Stanley did not question why or how this bucket was speaking to him. It should have alarmed him, of course, because buckets can't talk. But Stanley chose not to think about this obvious fact. He was firmly convinced that the bucket had spoken to him, and he unthinkingly did whatever the bucket asked. In here, said the bucket. Go into this dark room over here. Stanley once again obeyed blindly. Now pick up the phone, said the bucket. Pick up the phone, and it will take us back home, where we can go about life together. This is the sad story of a man named Stanley and his bucket. Once upon a time, I gave Stanley a bucket because I thought he was lonely and could use a friend. And then, very distressingly, he began to believe the bucket could speak to him.
バケツが自分と話ができると思い込み始めたのです。すごい清潔な部屋だな。住みよい部屋だ。なんかおしゃれな絵も飾ってあって、おしゃれななんか五角形、正五角形のオブジェも飾ってある。で、私のバケツはどこにあったんだ？誰か私のバケツを。あ、いた。別。ハロー、スタンリー、僕は君と戻すためにジオを押して。
The Stanley Parable reassurance bucket was merely meant to provide the comforting glow of companionship. It doesn't literally talk and give you orders. Whatever Stanley is hearing the bucket say to him is just in his head.
それは自分の頭だけの、そんなわけ。 あれバケツは私のバケツ入ってた。安心のバケツ。僕を君の家へ連れて帰るために V をして。そうだね。
Lately, I've been concerned about him. Wouldn't you be concerned as well? To see him delusional like this, obsessing over an inanimate metal object? I want to say something to him, but I don't know how I can convince him. I don't know if he'll listen to me.
持ってる数さえわかりません。落ち着くな。お、バケツよ。バケツよ。本題を戻るために Y をして。はい。
Well, I'll try anyway. Stanley, can you hear me? Listen to me. It's just a bucket. It can't think, it can't talk. All it would ever truly do for you is effectively transfer a liquid from one location to a different location. That's it. It doesn't do anything else.
このうるさい男の言うことは聞くな。僕たちが家へ帰るために V をして。
You see, he's not listening. He's still taking orders from the bucket. You know, once upon a time it was me he took orders from, me he trusted and listened to. Now all he cares about is this awful bucket, this stupid hunk of metal.
入った。バケツ。君の人生で僕以外全員を無視するために B をして。
It's sad. I suppose he doesn't need me anymore. From now on, he's just going to cling to this bucket, this cold, empty bucket, this sort of shiny bucket. Well, I'll give it this. The bucket does have a nice shine to it.
そうでしょ、ナレーターさん。あなたもバケツの魅力に取り憑かれたんだ。僕は実在するって信じてるんだよね、スタンリー。家へ帰るために C をして。
Yes, I suppose on closer inspection that it doesn't quite look like your average hardware store bucket. It's just a little more, what am I trying to say? Sturdier, more capable of transporting liquid. Like it would be better at moving an amount of water from one room to another.
そうでしょう、いいでしょう。このバケツ。T を押すと、この同じ日を何度も何度も僕と繰り返せるよ。素晴らしい日々。あれ
Oh my God, what am I
私は
saying?
何を言ってるんだ
Better at carrying water from room to room. It's a bucket. It's literally just a bucket. Why do I feel some need to point out the ways in which it's so much more than just a regular bucket?
そうだよね。ただのバケツのはずなのに。でもこれには魅力が感じられる。家へ仕事へ、家へ仕事へ、家へ帰るために K を押せ。
I'm having feelings for the bucket. No, 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 no. What's going on? Why do I want to be with the bucket? Hear what the bucket has to say. Do anything it asks. What's wrong with me? I don't understand. Perhaps if I had the bucket, this would be less confusing. Yes. The bucket could tell me what to do in this troublesome situation.
ナレーターさんもこっちにおいで。
Stanley, give me the bucket. Give it to me. Give me the bucket, Stanley. I need it. Give it to me now. Give it or I'll...
戻ろう、スタンリー。お、私は一体。
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo. Warmth spread through Stanley's arms. With the bucket in his arms again, he was home. Stanley clutched the bucket tightly to his chest and entered the door on his left.
素晴らしい冒険の始まりだ。
Still no one was here. Stanley needed the bucket's warmth and comfort now more than ever. Perhaps his boss's office was where he'd find answers. Coming to a staircase, Stanley and the bucket walked upstairs to the boss's office.
はい、なんか怖いけどバケツと一緒にいれば不安もない。
But Stanley just couldn't do it. He considered the possibility of facing his boss, admitting he had left his post during work hours. He might be fired for that. And in such a competitive economy, why had he taken that risk? All because he believed everyone had vanished? His boss would think he was crazy. And then, something occurred to Stanley. Maybe, he thought to himself, maybe I am crazy. He looked down at the bucket in his arms. Am I crazy? He asked the bucket. The bucket returned his gaze, but said nothing at all. That's strange, Stanley thought. Usually the bucket is a source of guidance and wisdom for me in difficult times such as these. He held the bucket close, yet felt none of its familiar reassurance and comfort. And that's when Stanley realized, this isn't my bucket. It's just a normal, everyday bucket. Someone else's bucket, perhaps. How did I end up with someone else's bucket? This is all terribly wrong. Surely no good would come from this. Who knows what sorts of bizarre hallucinations Stanley might experience without the psychologically grounding presence of his bucket. And indeed, now he noticed that the rooms were repeating, which was, of course, very odd. Now he felt himself floating off the ground. Oh, gracious, he exclaimed. Without my bucket, I've gone truly mad. Where is it? I must find it. Far off in the distance now, he heard it, calling to him.
Stanley! Stanley, it's me! The bucket!
The bucket.
Could it truly be? He rushed forward from room to room, passing by one bucket after the next. None of them were his. None of them were his special bucket.
Come to me, Stanley! Find me!
He had to find the bucket. He had to return to his old friend. It was the only way to truly restore his sanity. And then suddenly, he froze dead in his tracks. He knew where the voice of the bucket had been coming from. The real bucket was inside of him all along. It was incredibly painful. Stanley doubled over in agony and blacked out. This is the story of a woman named Mariella. Mariella woke up on a day like any other. She arose, got dressed, picked up her bucket of comfort and security, and walked to her place of work. But on this particular day, her walk was interrupted by the body of a man who had stumbled through town, talking and screaming to himself, and then collapsed dead on the sidewalk. Right away, she knew what the problem was. This man had no bucket. Of course he'd gone mad, ranting and raving about a narrator describing all of his actions and how everything is predetermined and free will is an illusion and it's all just a video game. It could all have been prevented if only he'd taken his bucket with him. Perhaps he didn't even realize he'd forgotten his bucket at home in the first place. How cruel the world can be, Mariella thought, and she hugged her own bucket even tighter. But of course, she had no time for this. There were a myriad of confusing problems she would soon have to confront at work, for which her bucket would provide absolute guidance and total clarity on everything. Heck yes, she thought to herself, my life kicks ass. And she backflipped all the way to work.
夢でも見てんのかな。
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had Stanley picked up the bucket and smiled. He'd never be alone again, not truly alone, not with the bucket around. Stanley clutched the bucket tightly to his chest and entered the door on his left. Still no one was here. Stanley needed the bucket's warmth and comfort now more than ever. Perhaps his boss's office was where he'd find answers. Coming to a staircase, Stanley and the bucket walked upstairs to the boss's office.
Special contents.
You found one of them. One of the miniature Stanley figurines. Remember, no reward for collecting all of these. Only the intrinsic pleasure of a job well done. You can't buy that sort of happiness, Stanley. God knows I've tried. So, I implore you to savor each and every moment you come across one of these beautiful figurines.
イエーイ。これはどういう絵なんだ。チリ。ボサノバタイム。でも回は変わらないんだよな。
Stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. Crushed by the weight of this revelation, Stanley may have broken down into an emotional dumpster fire, if not for the soothing presence. But Stanley guessed the correct code by sheer luck. Was it that the bucket knew all along? Was the bucket guiding him? Yes, this is certainly the most logical explanation. The elevator raced downward, plummeting towards an unknown fate. It would be all Stanley could do to keep himself together, if not for the bucket, soothing him, comforting him, reassuring that in this darkest moment of uncertainty, he would be all right. The bucket is here for you, Stanley. Everything will be fine. Stanley and the bucket walked straight ahead through the large door that read, Mind Control. Although this passageway had the word escape written on it, the truth was that at the end of this hall, Stanley and the bucket would both meet a violent death.
全ての抱えられの脱出。素晴らしい。
The door behind them was not shut. Stanley and the bucket still had every opportunity to turn around and get back on track. At this point, Stanley and the bucket were knowingly walking forward into a very painful death for each of them.
そんなことはない。いざゆかん、この苦しみからの脱出は、もう一旦。
As the machine whirred into motion and Stanley and the bucket inched closer to their demise, Stanley reflected on how meaningless the bucket's warmth and comfort had turned out to be. To be sure, it puts the mind and the soul at ease to embrace the bucket, but what use is a sense of ease when you're about to be crushed to death? This is what Stanley thought to himself, and he sort of kicked himself for wasting so much time carrying a bucket everywhere. Farewell, Stanley.
やだ。助けてバケツ。
Farewell, Stanley, cried the narrator,
新しいナレー
as
ターさん。
Stanley and the bucket were led helplessly into the enormous metal jaws. In a single visceral instant, the bucket's life came to an end as it was crushed violently
バ
to
ケツ。
death.
おいったい。スタンリー・
It was a shame, the death of such a
死んでしまった
magnificent
こと
bucket.
誠に残
It's
念な
true
のです
that
が
all buckets are radiant in their own way,
助けですが
but this
こ
one
のバケ
stood
ツは群を
above
抜い
the
ていました
rest. It was a glorious bucket to behold.
見事なバケツでした。バケツ。大展示会のご来場をお待ちしております。あなたは今、知識の崖に立っています。人の精神はたびたびバケツに空っぽになり、洞窟のような虚無感にさえあります。しかしあなたの目の前にある展示物を使うことで、心は豊かに満たされ、具現化されます。このバケツの知識とその歴史は、私たちが持つ唯一の真実の知識なのです。ここであなたが学んだことを世界に持ち出すつもりですが、この展示情報について課題があるかもしれませんが、心を開いてくれますか？あなたの生活やあなたの大切な人をこの展示のきっかけに変えられますか？もしくはあなたは目を背け、無知と暗闇の中で今までと同じように生きますか？バケツ。
Can you see how arrogant it was for Stanley to take a bucket like this and to claim it for his own? Can you see the hubris that blinded him? Can you see that the bucket is far more noble than Stanley will ever be in his short life?
バケツってこんなにすごかったんだな。史上最多である25個のバケツをカメラに収めたものです。この写真に加え一緒に超えるほどたくさんのバケツを目の当たりにするという幸福感から数週間にわたり緊張性ショックを患いました。2つの取っ手付きバケツ。このバケツは取っ手が2つ書かれています。このようなデザインは今まで現実には一度も前例がなく、危険すぎる無謀な実験とされています。毎年それを試みただけで十数人が処刑されています。なんと、バケツに2個以上取ってつけるといけないんだね。あの例の無限の穴か。地獄バケツ。地獄バケツのレプリカ。中世紀、この強力な魅力を持つバケツの支配をめぐり、数十カ国が戦争を引き起こしました。10億人もの命を落としたにもかかわらず、誰もバケツを支配できないという事実だけが残されています。バケツ、すごいバケツだ。ストレスバケツ、解説なし。なんかすごい。洞窟の絵。バケツが人類誕生より前にすでに実在していた頃は知られているものの、いつ頃から存在していたのかは知られていません。この洞窟の穴は古代人によるバケツの実用的な使い方の発見について書かれたもので、この時すでにバケツは数千年前から存在していたのです。このような注目すべき点は、バケツ自身が使うことを許可し、人類がその宝を使うのにふさわしいと判断された点と言えます。古代の息吹が聞こえてくる。
No man can own a bucket, and certainly not a bucket as dazzling to behold as this one. It is man who should kneel before the
人間
bucket.
なのです。そうだったのか、バケツ。真の世界の支配者はバケツ。ぶら下げられたバケツ。この作品は人間とバケツの必要な関係性を象徴しています。どれほどバケツが我々の主にあろうとも、まだまだ把握しきれていない部分がたくさんあるのです。この距離は私自身のために必然的にあるのです。 おろ
But there is something we can do, something we can do together, you and I, that will right this terrible wrong. Let Stanley die. Let him be crushed by the machine. Don't reset the game. Don't give him another opportunity to run off with another beautiful bucket. We can save the world's buckets from their treatment as tools and implements if only we let Stanley die together. The bucket shall take its place as ruler, as leader, as commander of a new world, a new vision.
まさかバケツ過激派だったとは恐ろしい。バケツを下手に
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo.
Meeting today in the meeting room. こんな張り紙あったっけ？ああ。
The good old bucket. Just Stanley and the bucket. Off on another thrilling adventure together.
Yeah.
Stanley clutched the bucket tightly to his chest and entered the door on his left. This was not the correct way to the meeting room, but Stanley had felt the bucket calling to him, telling him that the employee lounge was simply the place to be. And here it was. Had the bucket turned out to be correct? No, never mind. The bucket was wrong. Stanley took the door on his left to go back to the meeting room. And so the two of them detoured through the maintenance section and walked straight ahead to the opposite door. Oh, good Stanley. I'm glad you found your way here. I knew you'd find this place eventually.
登れない感じ
You see, your friends and I are concerned for you, Stanley. We've come together here because we care about you very much. It's this bucket you're carrying around everywhere. The bucket isn't even from the original Stanley Parable. It's just sequel content. We're the ones that matter, Stanley. Classic characters from the first game, like the Adventure Line and the Broom Closet. Because that's what fans want from a sequel. They want more of their favorite jokes, not this bucket that they've never seen before. Yes, I know I'm the one who gave you the bucket, but you're spending too much time with it. Don't you want another story involving the Adventure Line? We could make the Adventure Line go somewhere new. Yes, that's what the... Whee! Look at that wacky line. Who knows where it'll go off to next? Oh, and it played some silly music as well. Now this is what the Stanley Parable is all about. Don't you remember all those great jokes from the original dialogue? Also, Stanley is addicted to drugs and hookers. It's as classic now as it was back then. Let's do it for the fans, Stanley. Let's give them more content exactly like this. But if we want to do that, you're going to have to give something up. Don't you get it, Stanley? We need to get rid of the bucket. That's why I'm very proud to introduce a brand new character. This is the Bucket Destroyer. I think it'll make a wonderful new addition to the rich lore of the Stanley Parable. True, it also was not in the original game, but it's such a well-fleshed-out character with so much personality that to me it already feels as though it's been part of the cast all along. Don't you agree? Can you guess what the Bucket Destroyer does? Surely you don't need me to spell it out for you. Go ahead now, Stanley. Say goodbye to the bucket, and then pop it into the machine when you're ready. Now listen to me. it's crucial that you give it the bucket. I don't know what the bucket destroyer will do if it can't destroy your bucket. Destroying buckets is all it knows. That is its singular personality trait. Sure, I can hear you saying, how does a character with only one personality trait deserve to join the pantheon of beloved Stanley Parable characters? Well, you see, if you were to really explore the bucket destroyer, you would see that its desire to crush buckets is so densely loaded with complexity and nuance that it's really like 10 personality traits. What other object in this game can you even say that about? The broom closet? Certainly not. I wonder what sort of bucket destroyer merchandise the fans will be clamoring for after this. Okay, the bucket destroyer is getting very upset now. You'll have to hurry and feed it. We can't get back to the classic Stanley Parable characters like the Adventure Line or the bucket destroyer until you crush that damn bucket. Quickly now, the fans are waiting. Do it, the fans, Stanley. Give the fans what they want. Hurry and... The bucket destroyer, my prized creation. You had so much potential. We were going to do such marvelous things with you, tell such spellbinding stories about you. All of it squandered now. Goodbye, new friend. For the moment in time that you were here, you were magnificent.
さよならバケツデストロイヤー。さて。
I can't wait to tell this story to my co-workers, Stanley thought. How amusing they'll find it. Oh, won't we all just laugh and laugh at the time I thought everyone had gone missing. No matter how hard Stanley looked, he couldn't find a trace of his co-workers.
本当だよね。
Where are we going today? The bucket asked. Stanley just smiled. Anywhere they went together would be perfectly fine with him. Stanley clutched the bucket tightly to his chest, and this was not the correct way to the meeting room. But Stanley had felt the bucket calling to him, telling him that the employee lounge was simply the place to be. And here it was. Had the bucket turned out to be correct? Never mind. The bucket was wrong. Stanley took the door on his left to go back, and so the two of them detoured through the maintenance section and walked straight ahead to the opposite door.
なんもないんだ。How we can find them? Trust the completion's instinct. Why wouldn't they just tell us something will happen? This investigation, this do they feel pointless? Follow clues provided by employee 416. 416? There will be a reward for finding them all. Mission status inside of us. なんか書いてある。A large room, lots of boxes. 箱いっぱいところ。階段。Something to do with stairs. Somewhere both red and blue. Nearly the fireplace. ロック集めるところの。
Oh, Stanley, can you feel it? The broom closet. It wants the bucket. You can feel that, can't you? The aura of jealousy. It's as clear as day. This broom closet believes it deserves the bucket. I can really feel it now. It's a bucket. It belongs in a broom closet. That's what the broom closet is trying to say here. It's supposed to go with the other cleaning supplies. Good for you, Stanley. Don't give in. Don't hand over the bucket. I know how hard it must be, given the pressure that the broom closet is putting on your shoulders right now, but you have to be strong. This is your bucket. This is your companion and lifelong friend. You can't hand it over. No. We're getting into name-calling now, it seems. Is this how low the broom closet has sunk, that it has to resort to this stream of petty insults simply in order to get you to hand over the bucket? Stanley, I never liked this broom closet for a variety of reasons, but even this is worse than I had imagined. And wait, now the broom closet has the gall to imply that you and the bucket are not truly deep and lasting friends? That your relationship is purely superficial and convenient? Coming to a staircase, Stanley and the bucket walked upstairs to the boss's office. Stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. Crushed by the... But Stanley guessed the correct code by sheer luck. Was it that the bucket knew all along? Was the bucket guiding him? Yes, this is certainly the most logical explanation. Another miniature Stanley figurine. This, you know, there really must be a snappier name for these things. What about mini-stands? Stanley figs. What about Stanlerines? Yes, I think I like that. Another Stanlerine under your belt. Wait, Stanley said to the bucket. Can we go back up? When I was pressing those keypad buttons, there was something very intriguing about the number 3. I want to go back so I can try pressing the number 3 again. The bucket said nothing. Here we are, said Stanley. Now I'm going to try out that number 3 button. He took the bucket over to the keypad and began absolutely slamming. Wow, he said. The number 3 is such a special button. I'm having the time of my life. Stanley looked expectantly at the bucket, but the bucket remained silent. This was a shock to Stanley, who had always felt such a connection with the bucket. How was this not as exciting to the bucket as it was to him? Once Stanley had had enough of the number 3, he got back in the elevator. Perhaps the bucket had missed something. Perhaps it had not seen how much joy Stanley got from slamming the number 3 repeatedly. No, said Stanley to the bucket. You can't go on yet. Not till you understand how much the number 3 means to me. You and I have been through so much together, and I just want you to see what I see. Feel the happiness I feel. He smiled at the bucket, and the bucket said nothing. Here we go, said Stanley. This time I'll really show you. He ran to the number 3 and began to wail on it like a musician on a beloved instrument, weaving a concerto of truth and passion. he wielded the number 3 like a fine artist would wield a paintbrush. He told stories through the number 3, stories of his dreams and hopes and fears, and the whole time he looked to his bucket for a reaction of some kind. Anything to let him know that the bucket appreciated what he was doing. The bucket conveyed absolutely nothing at all, only silence. Crushed by a wave of dejection, Stanley returned to the elevator. Stanley and the bucket were so close. They'd always been there for one another. Why suddenly could the bucket not connect with this passion of Stanley's? The question caused Stanley to ruminate the whole way down the elevator. He knew that there must be a way to get through to the bucket, to communicate fully with his dear friend. Surely there was a solution, mustn't there be?
やっぱり君には3の素晴らしさを知ってもらわないと。
Said Stanley. I know what to do. I know how to fully express this feeling in my heart. He decided right then and there that he would hold a press conference where he would speak to the public on all matters relating to pressing the number 3 over and over. He would elaborate fully on what the number 3 meant to him and why he felt so alive when pressing it. Then the bucket would be able to see his joy through the eyes of others. It would get to see the world react to this discovery of Stanley's. And it would be through the public eye that the bucket would finally understand Stanley's work. For months, he advertised and marketed his press conference, building excitement around it, developing and rehearsing it until it couldn't be refined a single measure further. When the big day arrived, Stanley was as prepared as he'd ever been for anything in his life.
World peace, baby. Two stage. 3
This was it. One last chance to win the bucket over. One opportunity to share a true connection with a loved one. There was no one here. Nobody had come to the press conference to hear Stanley speak, to listen to him talk about what it really means to press the number 3 on a keypad over and over. He was unloved, uninteresting, he was a failure, and in that moment Stanley knew that the bucket would never again take him seriously. There would be no connection, no deeper understanding. The bucket merely sat there in his arms, indifferent. And so it began that slowly, over many years, the two of them grew more and more distant. They spoke less and less, neither wishing to state the obvious, that any sense of real respect between them had eroded since that day at the press conference. There would be no more games, no more long conversations about passion and pursuit, only a silence that consumed the space between friends. And Stanley, having for once in his life discovered the warmth and comfort of true companionship, was cast back into the unremarkable normalcy of loneliness.
悲しい。悲しみ。さあ、気を取り直して。
A soft wind blew outside and perhaps rain started, and if it did, it stopped shortly after. Stanley hoped that he would one day see weather.
天気を見ることができるようになるんでしょうか。鉛筆削りだけのデスク。だから箱がいっぱいある部屋って。 つを手に取らずに行ってみるか。
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
Large room, lots of books. There's something to do with stairs. Some are both red and blue. 大きな部屋、箱がいっぱいある。どこのことなんだろう。
Stanley stepped into the broom closet, but there was nothing here, so he turned around and got back on track. Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
じゃあこれから真の自由へと向かおう。Osanova time.
Stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. Shocked, unraveled, Stanley wondered in disbelief who orchestrated this. What dark secret was being held from? Stanley was in such a rush to get through the story as quickly as possible, he didn't even have a single minute to just let the narrator talk. That kind of anxiety isn't healthy, so he relaxed for a few moments with some calming New Age music. Feeling soothed and rejuvenated, Stanley calmly walked forward into the opened passageway. Stanley walked straight ahead through the large door that read Mind Control Facility. The lights rose on an enormous room packed with television screens. What horrible secret did this place hold? Stanley thought to himself. Did he have the strength to find out? Now the monitors jumped to life, their true nature revealed. Each bore the number of an employee in the building, Stanley's co-workers. The lives of so many individuals reduced to images on a screen, and Stanley, one of them, eternally monitored in this place where freedom meant nothing.
私たちを監視し続けていたのと、なんていうことだ。レベルか。
This mind control facility, it was too horrible to believe. It couldn't be true. Had Stanley really been under someone's control all this time? Was this the only reason he was happy with his boring job? That his emotions had been manipulated to accept it blindly? No. He refused to believe it. He couldn't accept it. His own life in someone else's control? Never. It was unthinkable. Wasn't it? Was it even possible? Had he truly spent his entire life utterly blind to the world? But here was the proof. The heart of the operation. Controls labeled with emotions. Happy or sad or content. Walking, eating, working. All of it monitored and commanded from this very place. And as the cold reality of his past began to sink in, Stanley decided that this machinery would never again exert its terrible power over another human life. For he would dismantle the controls once and for all.
5があって、1、2、3。なくて4面。2があって4がない。あと4。ここ出てくな。もう階段暗すぎ。これ。出ないのこれ。しゃあないな。マインドコントロールアイドルアウェイティングインプット。
And when at last he found the source of the room's power, he knew it was his duty, his obligation, to put an end to this horrible place and to everything it stood for.
そしてオフラインになって
Blackness
暗闇
and a
そし
rising
て不安
chill
で
of
高まる恐怖
uncertainty.
心
Was it over? Yes. He had
彼は
won.
勝ったんです
He had defeated the
彼は
machine.
破壊して
unshackled himself from someone else's command. Freedom was mere moments away. And yet, even as the immense door slowly opened, Stanley reflected on how many puzzles still lay unsolved. Where had his co-workers gone? How had he been freed from the machine's grasp? What other mysteries did this strange building hold? But as sunlight streamed into the chamber, he realized none of this mattered to him, for it was not knowledge or even power that he had been seeking, but happiness. Perhaps his goal had not been to understand, but to let go. No longer would anyone tell him where to go, what to do, or how to feel. Whatever life he lives, it will be his. And that was all he needed to know. It was perhaps the only thing worth knowing. Stanley stepped through the open door.
足を踏み入れていきました。これが本当の自由。
Stanley felt the cool breeze upon his skin, the feeling of liberation, the immense possibility of the new path before him. This was exactly the way, right now, that things were meant to happen. And Stanley was happy.
さっきのは夢。この絵にある写真の向こう側、私には分からない。というわけで、スタンリー・パラブルウルトラデラックス、実はスタンリー・パラブル2、この世界楽しんでいきました。いろいろな分岐でいろんなことが起こる面白いシステムの中で、また皆さんもし自分自身でこの世界を歩いてみてください。ナレーターの人ともぜひ仲良くしてください。また私自身もまたって2回言っちゃったけど、いろんなこの他にも多分隠されたコンテンツだっけさ、スタンルリーとか残っているから、また時間のある時にやってみようと思います。ぜひ皆さんも6体すべて見つけられるチャレンジやってみてください。それでは遅い時間にどうもありがとうございました。また何か別のところでお会いする。また別のところでお会いしましょう。ちょっとこの画面赤くて怖いけど。それじゃあ皆さん、また会いましょう。どうもお付き合いいただきありがとうございました。